The British economy is on the brink of total collapse. Things have been bad for almost 20 years now since the global financial crisis, and they've been awful since the pandemic turned what was a dying economy into an already dead one. And now the British economy is outright apocalyptic, as this socialist government seems intent on making everyone poorer as long as the rich get poorer as well. Over the last 2 days, we've had two massive developments. One regarding the loss of 250,000 jobs across the country, equivalent to the US losing about 1.5 million jobs because of how much smaller we are, and the other of a government in complete disarray, being forced to abandon their disastrous policies because of how hopeless the data is that's coming out. Now, if you invest in the UK, if you live here or anywhere in the West, this will impact you. British financial services are still some of the largest in the world. Our property market is still huge, massively overvalued, and bet on by derivatives of derivatives that plague the global financial system. We learned in 2008 that no one country can fail alone. They take everything down with them, and with how shaky things already are in Canada, in Europe, and in the States, the UK's collapse could easily become a trigger to take down the rest of the West with it. Now, if that worries you, I don't blame you. It worries me too, which is why I've done everything I can over the last 4 years to detach myself from the British economy despite living here. My business has clients all over the world, and we have the ability to price our services in whichever currency we like and to hire staff in whichever country we like as well. If you want to build that same security for yourself or for your family, my business Grow Coach helps experts and enthusiasts turn their knowledge, experience, and expertise into six-figure online coaching consulting businesses. And I even made a free guide for you here explaining how the industry works and how you can build your own online education business to 6 figures a year. You can download the free guide in the link down below in the description, along with a training alongside it. Now, the first major issue we've just discovered in the British economy is with our employment. The Labour government increased a tax called national insurance. It's not actually national insurance, that's just a propaganda style name to trick people into thinking it's for healthcare or pensions or whatever else, but in reality it's just a tax on income and a tax on employing staff. The first half of that tax is paid by an employer on top of the salary they're already paying, and then the second half of that tax is paid by an employee. This basically just means it's a stealth income tax that most British people don't really understand. If you make a salary of £50,000, your boss is actually paying £57,000 to you. It's just the government takes £7,000 off your employer straight away before you even notice it. Then the government takes another £3,000 off you for your national insurance, and then it takes another £7,000 off you for income tax, so you think you've only paid £7,000 in income tax on your £50,000 salary, but in reality you've paid £17,000. Now, the Labour government, they raised national insurance on employers on that side of the equation, meaning it's more expensive to hire people in the UK today than it was a year ago. Now, what would any basic economist expect from that tax raid? Well, obviously fewer companies wanting to employ people, and so fewer jobs in the economy and more unemployment. And that is literally exactly what's happened. Now, I appreciate we're used to thinking of jobs in terms of the US economy, where a rise or drop of 100,000 over a month is actually seen as quite stable because of how large the US is. But in March, the US lost 275,000 jobs in a single month, and everyone was terrified of the impacts. The US, though, is literally 5 times the population of the UK. So to put these numbers into perspective, we need to times them by 5 to see what they would look like in the States. Now, over the last month alone, jobs in the UK went down by 109,000, or about 0.4 of the entire job market within one single month. So a 109,000 reduction in jobs in one single month would be equivalent to 545,000 jobs lost in a single month in the US. Now, we need to remember that the US panicked and thought the economy was about to self-destruct when they saw 275,000 job losses in March. But the month before last, jobs in the UK reduced by 55,000, or about that same catastrophic figure that the US saw in March when adjusted per capita. Over the last year, total payrolls here in the UK is reduced by 276,000, equivalent to 1.4 million in the US. And the worst part of all this, immigration over the last year has been 431,000. So we've lost 276,000 jobs, and on top of that, we've added 431,000 people who use our hospitals, schools, roads, trains, police, and all our other services as well. And in case you wanted to see what a collapsing labour market looks like, well, it's this graph right here, a slow reversal followed by a very steep, very quick drop. Now, this alone is enough to send anyone with half a brain cell worrying, but it does unfortunately get worse, and that's exactly why why I've spent so much of my time over the last 4 years detaching myself from the British economy as much as possible. Now, I realize that there's essentially been a revolution since the pandemic in the online education industry that's now worth more than $200 billion a year. It's all based on experts and enthusiasts selling their knowledge, their experience, and their expertise to those who want to learn online, essentially building their own fully online coaching or consulting businesses. And that's exactly what my business, Grow Coach, helps people do. Coaches in this industry aren't limited by geography. We can sell to anyone, anywhere in the world, and we can leverage the Zoom revolution to do it while this opportunity is still thriving. So if you have information, experience, or expertise, you've run a business, done well in a career, won an award, or you're just really into a hobby or a particular interest of yours, there's a very high chance that you could take that information you already have and use it to build a six-figure online business. And to help you out, I made this 100% free guide and a free training to go alongside it, explaining exactly how this industry works, how you can take your information, experience, or expertise and turn it into that six-figure online business. This guide right here, you can download 100% for free in the link down below in the description, and you can get a free training going alongside it, explaining exactly how this all works. Now, these new developments regarding job losses aren't the only issues though. There are countless more, but the biggest ones are capital flight, government overexpansion, the national debt and interest on that national debt, and mass immigration. And each of these topics is going to get a full breakdown on this channel over the next few weeks because we can't afford to ignore these problems any longer. But for today, I'm going to break it all down into just a few short minutes apiece. Now, obviously, when you tax people too much, they actually end up paying less tax. This is called the Laffer curve, and it is a really simple idea. If you tax me on 50% of my income, I'm going to pay a lot in tax. If you tax me at 99% of my income, I'm going to pay zero tax because I'm not going to bother working for any income. Now, the same is 100% true for trying to tax the wealthy, and that's exactly what the UK government did over the last year, and it's backfired awfully. They raised capital gains tax from 10% at its lowest rate to now 28% at its highest rate. Now, each bracket rose from somewhere in the region of 40 to 80% from where it was before, an absolutely huge increase. So did capital gains taxes paid rise between somewhere like 40 to 80%? No, the actual amount of capital gains taxed by the government over the last year fell by 10%. Why? Because those who would have been paying it, they just left the country instead. Now, they also left because of another tax raid that the Labour put into place called the non-dom regime. They ended it, but basically, in the past, if your primary home is outside the UK and you have businesses or investments around the world making money, you would only pay UK tax on assets that are actually in the UK. And that makes perfect sense, right? You're not a British citizen, you live in Malta, your business is based in Malta. Why on earth would the UK government be within their rights to tax you on your income in Malta just because you spend a few months a year living in London? And let's not forget that these people do still spend a fair amount of time in the UK, as much as 5 months a year, spending in our economy, investing into it, paying consumption taxes, and almost always not using up any public services like healthcare or education because those people are so rich. And on top of that, they actually were already paying income taxes too, just on flat rates of £30,000 to £60,000 a year based on their circumstances, far more than any average British worker. Across the board, these non-doms were a huge benefit to the British economy, but our socialist government is changing the rules to try and tax them on everything they own all around the world, so these multi-millionaires and even billionaires are just leaving. Now, just how many millionaires are leaving the UK? Well, more than any other country on earth except for China. You know, China, that literal communist dystopia where billionaires disappear and are often executed without the world ever finding out, all because they said the wrong thing about their glorious leader. Well, last year, the UK lost 9,500 millionaires and China lost 15,200 millionaires. That was first place and second place in this awful competition. But China, of course, has 1.4 billion people, 20 times more people than the United Kingdom. So per capita, yes, the UK lost more millionaires last year than literally any other country on earth. Those 9,500 millionaires who left, well, they used to pay more in tax every year than 1.5 million average people in the UK. In the UK last year, the top 1% richest paid 29% of all tax. If that 1% leave, the amount of hospitals we need, it stays the same. The amount of police we need, it stays the same. The amount of schools we need, it stays the same. The cost to run the country on the whole stays the same, but the government loses a third of its entire income stream to run the country. So the second major problem is crushing levels of taxes for those who can't leave, higher than we've seen since the Second World War. The government has been getting bigger and bigger over decades now. That's no surprise, but it is now at the point where 45% of every single pound that's spent in this country every year is just the government spending it. Now, why is that bad? Well, two reasons: choice and efficiency. The government is essentially making 45% of the decisions for every individual in the country. How your schools are run, what clothes you can wear, what car you can drive, where you can go on holiday, or if you get a train or bus to work. When the government spends money, they are taking money off people, making decisions for them, and almost always doing a bad job, because it's simply not possible for a government to know what an individual actually wants. And to optimize for 60 million individuals all at once is just not possible. And then of course comes government efficiency, or rather inefficiency. Governments are inherently inefficient because there's no incentive to be efficient, so we see waste across the board. The best example of this is HS2, a high-speed railway being built across the UK that's going to cost more than £100 billion to build a single railway halfway across England. Now, SpaceX designed and built the most efficient and powerful rocket in history for $500 million because they're a private company and they're efficient. OpenAI built ChatGPT, the most influential piece of single technology since the invention of the internet or the steam engine, for $500 million. But building a railway, not actually inventing anything, not developing anything, it's not the fastest railway in the world, it's not the most efficient, it's just a bit faster than average high-speed railways, and not even the fastest in Europe. All the technology for HS2 already exists, and this is going to cost 200 times more than OpenAI spent to develop artificial intelligence, and 200 times more than it costs SpaceX to develop and build a rocket that can actually take humans to Mars. Now, to sum this all up, this here is a graph of efficiency of the average worker in the UK in the public sector, or basically the government side of the economy, compared to the private sector, the free market side of the economy. Since 1997, the private sector has gotten 40% more efficient. That means people are doing more with less and making more money, where they then get to pay more taxes when they're in the private sector. The public sector, though, has gotten 4% more efficient over that same time period. When COVID hit, the private sector actually got more efficient by adopting things like Zoom and other technologies, whereas the public sector got less efficient because they just shut everything down and refused to do anything despite it being 100% feasible. In essence, the more a government takes from its people and spends on their behalf, the poorer a country becomes. And the UK is spending as much as it possibly can, and worse than that, it's spending money it doesn't even have to waste on things that people don't even want. Debt to GDP of the UK currently sits at 96%. In 2004, it was just 40%. In 1996, the government was actually running at a surplus, meaning they were paying off debt each year, not getting into more of it, but that hasn't happened in almost 30 years now, and the national debt is set to grow up to 300% over the course of the next few decades. We're seeing higher interest rates as the stability of the country is threatened. Now, that huge debt we have, it costs 5.4% of its value a year just to finance at the moment, higher than the United States' 4.9% and far higher than Germany's 3%. If the UK could, it would be looking to cut interest rates further to try and bring down the cost of this debt service, but we can't. And why is that? Well, because lower interest rates stimulate inflation, and so you can only lower those interest rates if prices in your economy are stable, and in the UK, they are simply not stable. We're seeing inflation rise again because the socialists in charge of our country decided to increase government spending. Over a period of just 5 days in May just gone by, the Labour socialists increased government spending by £55 billion, £16 billion giving away to the European Union, £4 billion in overspend for spending in the UK from April alone, just 1 month, £5 billion for the child benefit cap and winter fuel allowance, £10 billion giving away to Mauritius, a country that's allied with one of Britain's greatest enemies, China, along with giving away that British territory, £7 billion on public sector pay rises, and an extra £13 billion for future public sector pay rises as well. £55 billion in extra spending in just 5 days. That money is not being taxed directly, it's being printed out of thin air. It's causing inflation, with figures rising from 2.6% last year when Labour were in power to up to 4.1% on the CPIH last month, just 10 months into their government, and they've almost doubled inflation. But at the end of the day, these problems are actually relatively fixable, just as soon as we can get the uni-party socialists out of power and replace the Tories and Labour with responsible actors. That is possible, not exactly likely anytime soon, but it is at least possible. What isn't really possible is fixing the crisis taking the UK apart at the seams, which is defended by every single political party in the country. That is, of course, mass immigration. Now, since the global financial crisis, the UK has failed to see any real growth in wealth. The GDP of the country has technically gotten larger, but only because we've been inviting literally millions and millions of immigrants to pad the numbers up. When you actually look at GDP per capita, the amount of economic stimulation driven by the average person in the UK per year, it's been going down, meaning the average Brit has been getting poorer. In 2007, GDP per capita was $50,000. Today, it's $49,000. 18 years of mass immigration supposedly making the country richer, and in fact, the average person has gotten poorer. The United States, on the other side, well, their GDP per capita was $48,000 in 2007, and now it sits at $83,000. The average American is 72% richer than they were 18 years ago. The average Brit is 2% poorer. Mass immigration has been used by the political elite of the UK to hide this reality behind technically rising GDP figures, knowing that the average person doesn't ever see the GDP per capita figures. Now, the government claims that immigration is a net positive for the UK economy, that they are usually of working age and therefore stimulate our economy, pay taxes and make us richer. And in fairness, that is actually true for well-educated and in particular Western immigrants. But those from poorer countries come often with no wealth and come and get no jobs. Many barely speak English at all, so they can't work. Those who can work almost always get paid in cash and pay nothing in taxes. They get given free housing, free phones, free food, free education, free driving lessons even, free everything from the taxpayer, and they do not have a positive net contribution to the British economy. And these are, unfortunately, the vast majority of immigrants we've seen over the last few years. Now, the cost to run this country has skyrocketed over the last 3 decades, and the only major change has been with the massive increase in net migration we've seen. Net migration from 1964 to 1997 was actually negative. More people were leaving than were coming in, and the single biggest figure in a single year during that period was 77,000 net new migrants in the UK, with the average during the final decade being around 50,000 a year. By the end of Tony Blair's awful government in 2007, though, he'd increased that to a net migration figure of 233,000, an increase of more than 460%. 8 years later, after Labour were ousted and the Tories came into power, and that number was then 329,000 per year, an increase of 660%. And in 2022, that number was 872,000 net migrants in a single year, an increase of 1,744% over the course of just over 2 decades. We went from letting in 50,000 people a year to 1 million a year at the exact same time everything in the country collapsed. Incomes stopped increasing, wealth stopped increasing, government debt started exploding, and inflation started rising. Everything got worse when we increased net migration by 1,744%, but the political and media establishment are so entrenched in their worlds that they refuse to see this as the failure it is, and so they're refusing to act against it. Whether it's Labour or the Tories, the outcome is the same: mass immigration and British people getting poorer by the day. And with all that chaos, you might expect the socialists in charge to be having some second thoughts about their disastrous policies, but unfortunately, you would be wrong, because the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, just announced her spending review, and she's decided that the solution to this disaster is to raise government spending by another 2.3% in real terms when inflation is currently at 4.1%. That means she's increasing spending by 6.4%. And as her tax raises to try and fund Labour's socialist policies have failed so far, she's decided this time not to raise taxes to fund this at all. Instead, she's just going to have our country take out more debt at the exact same time that the cost for the UK government's debt is just under 5%, the highest it's been in about 20 years. We are already taxing ourselves into poverty and wasting literally trillions of pounds on things that British people just don't want, causing inflation to spike above 4% when it was finally starting to come down, and now we're going to be printing trillions more in pounds just to keep this socialist facade going. Now, genuinely, the UK is one of the worst placed economies in the world right now. So much so that more millionaires are leaving us on a per capita basis than any other country in the world. So much so that British people have actually been getting poorer every year for 18 years in a row. When the UK's collapse accelerates, it will spill out into countless other countries as well. So if you're like me and you don't want to tie yourself to a sinking ship, check out my Grow Coach storage free guide and the free training I made to go alongside it. It explains and gives you a step-by-step process to take your information, your experience, and your expertise and turn that into a six-figure online coaching business. This isn't locked to any one country, so you can truly protect yourself. The download link for this free guide is in the description down below under the video, and there's a free training to go alongside it as well.